We are now good to go. We're streaming.
Okay. Welcome to the Northeastern Region Advisory Council meeting for April 16th, 2020. We're meeting in this online format due to the health restrictions, and we appreciate everybody's effort to bring this together for not only the RAC members, but for the public. I'd like to start with just welcoming the RAC members and ask for a roll call of who's there. If you would just turn on your mics and say your name. Say yes if you're here. No if you're. You don't have to say no if you're not. Just say yes if you're here. Dan Abeda.
Yes.
Richie Anderson.
Yes.
Joe Arnold. I believe Joe's here. I know I've seen him on the screen, so we'll skip over that.
Yes,
Jamie, Joe, thank you. Jamie, Arif. And I assume Julius Murray is not tonight. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Dick Bess.
Yes, I'm here.
And Daniel Davis.
Yes.
Natasha Haddon. Okay, Natasha, when you get it going, go ahead and.
Sorry, I'm here.
And okay, thank you. Brad Hortz.
Yes.
Rebecca Jones.
Yes, I'm here.
Mike Smith.
Yes, I'm here.
And as Jeff logged on, Jeff Taniguchi. Okay, we will move ahead without Jeff. We're not sure if he's going to make it or not. We'd like to welcome the DWR staff, especially those that went all the work of providing the presentations for the public and for the RAC members. And you did an excellent job on that. They will be available to answer questions through the meeting. And those that presented and that we would direct our questions to in each respective topic would be Kobe Jones, Chad Wilson, Brad Compton, Darren DeBlois, Riley Peck, and then I believe Marty Bushman and Greg Hansen are present if there are questions on the legal side of things. The DWR personnel are also available on this broadcast to ask questions, for the RAC to ask questions. We'd like to also welcome the public on YouTube. They do not have the opportunity to speak during the meeting, but they presented comments with a process that went through the DWR website. And we have them, and we will, at each topic, as we discuss it, we will also bring up the comments and address them and discuss them. I'd like to welcome Randy Dirth from the Wildlife Board. And with that, I believe we can start the agenda. The first item on the agenda will be to approve the agenda for this evening. And I would open it for a motion.
Yes, this is Dan Abeda, and I would make a motion that we go ahead and approve the agenda as it is in front of us.
Thank you, Dan.
This is Brad Horry, and I would second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. We will now vote on each motion. We need to say just yes or no. And we need to call through all the names to make it official. Dan Abeda.
Yes.
Richie Anderson.
Yes.
Joe Arnold.
Yes.
Jamie Arif.
Yes.
Dick Bess.
Yes.
Daniel Davis.
Yes.
Natasha Haddon,
Yes.
Brad Horitz,
Yes.
Rebecca Jones,
Yes.
Mike Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. That's unanimous. Has everyone had an opportunity? Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from the last meeting that were emailed out? And if so, I would entertain any suggested edits at this time. Okay, if there are none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
This is Natasha. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Thank you.
This
Need
is
a
Brad.
second, please?
This is Brad Horricks. I'd second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. We'll now take a roll call vote. Dan,
Yes.
Richie,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Yes.
Daniel, Dick, Natasha,
Yes.
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
and Mike.
Yes.
Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you. We will now move to the update from the Wildlife Board, and Dan Abeta attended that meeting in January, and he's going to take a few moments now and update the RAC on the Wildlife Board meeting, the previous one.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the action item on R657-33 Black Bear and R657-10 Cougar rule amendments was broken up into 3 separate motions. So I'll just go in that direction here. The first motion, which passed unanimously by the board, was a motion to add an ethics course for the online bear orientation and institute an online pursuit ethics course prior to purchasing a permit. So again, that passed unanimously. Secondly, and there was much discussion over this as we had in our own RAC meeting. But secondly, this next motion here, which also passed unanimously, is as follows. The motion that was made was that on those units that have 10 or fewer permits, that there would be no change to those units. Again, with 10 or fewer permits, there would be an increase of permits by 25% on the Beaver, Chalk Creek, and both the Book Cliff units. And then on all the other remaining units, that there would be a 10% increase. And also, it was voted on that the board would also defer to the Division of Wildlife to determine the permit distribution among the available seasons on units that have some crowding issues. And if you remember correctly, we spent a lot of time talking about the LaSalle's and the San Juans. So in particular, those 2 units. So that was the second of the 3 motions that passed. Then the final motion on this bear and cougar topic was that, and this one also passed unanimously, was that we accept the balance, the balance of the proposal that the division made be accepted as presented, including there was a red line correction in that on the 8-dog limit for both the summer pursuit and restricted summer pursuit seasons. So that was everything for bears and cougars. The next action item was a wolf management action plan, and that passed unanimously. The next item was a COR rule amendment for brine shrimp. That passed unanimously. And let's see, that was just, like I say, some amendments to the division presented on that. And then the last one was, let's see here. This was on a prohibited species variance request, and that passed unanimously as well. It had to do with Pacific white-legged shrimp. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all that that I had to report on.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to a report from Miles Hamburg on the DWR Regional Supervisor, and he will provide us an update.
All right, thanks, Brett. So I'll give a brief update on a few things that have been going on here in the region. As you all are very much aware, COVID-19 has had an impact on the things that we're doing, but we're able to get out and do a lot of work in the field still. And for a lot of our biologists, I think it's not had a major impact on our workload, but certainly we're limiting the amount of people in our offices at a time to try to follow social distancing guidelines and things along those natures. So one thing along those lines is we are encouraging the public as much as possible to utilize our online resources for buying permits and those types of things, just to limit the amount of traffic coming in and out of the office. So those options are out there, and we encourage people to take advantage of those. With COVID-19, it's kind of delayed some of our seasonal staff hiring on some of our different programs. So we're anxious to see if we can get through this this virus situation where we can start getting some of our seasonal staff on board. But for right now, we're kind of holding off on getting those at least this month. So that's had a little bit of an impact, but you know, our folks are still staying busy out in the field. So give some updates on some of our sections. In our law enforcement section, Officer Brendan White is leading us, and he's heading to the southern region. Took a promotion as a lieutenant down there in the Pingwich area. His position will be refilled by Ray Windsor. He's going to be coming here shortly to fill that Bookcliff Conservation Officer District that's vacated by Brandon. We're starting to gear up to cover boat ramps and things for our AIS coverage this year. We've already started coverage at Flaming Gorge just to make sure that we can prevent any spread of AIS. Incidentally, Lake Powell was shut down for launching. There were some boats that had left Lake Powell that have been tagged, that have been instructed to dry for at least 30 days. So we're verifying, you know, at Flaming Gorge that none of those boats launch within that drying period window. And then as well of any other AIS potential sources in other states that may be trying to come to Flaming Gorge specifically. Along the AIS lines in law enforcement, we've hired Jordan Dimmick. He's our new AIS specialist. He's replacing Jessica Wooten, who left to pursue some other career opportunities just in the last couple of months. Our wildlife section, they've been busy out in the field doing let counts and also starting on spring deer classifications. So those efforts have been going well. I understand that our deer survival is looking pretty good this year, both adults and fawns as well. So that's some good news from our wildlife section. Our aquatic section, they actually just completed a walleye spawn from Starvation Reservoir. It was a pretty small effort this year due to COVID-19, but they did get some eggs collected from Starvation. Those eggs will be treated and sterilized, and then if those fish pass the test for sterility, they'll be restocked into Red Fleet Reservoir. Our aquatic staff is also gearing up to do our wild egg takes for places like Lake Canyon and Sheep Creek. Those will be egg takes for Colorado River cutthroat trout. Our habitat section, they're working closely with some of our partners on the Strawberry River to work on restoration and emergency stabilization efforts As you guys, many of you know that the Dollar Ridge fire had a profound effect on the watershed of Strawberry River. So there's a lot of interest to get some stability in that river bottom from a variety of reasons. And our habitat folks are working closely on that effort to make sure that we can get some good habitat improvement in the process. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, a lot of our outreach events have been canceled, at least for the month of April into May. So we had some really cool events this year with the Mountain Goat Watch over at Rock Creek. We had goats there for people to see, but unfortunately we had to cancel those. But our staff remains busy working on other things and planning for future events. One thing I'll mention with outreach is we are still able to take dedicated hunter projects on. Some of those projects will definitely have social distancing parameters associated with them. So anyhow, and then the last thing I want to mention, give an update. Each RAC meeting for the last, not the last year, we'll give an update on our Book Cliff working group. That working group was a multi-agency group approach with ranchers, wildlife management agencies, wildlife groups. Anyways, this group was put together to address some of the issues, look at addressing some of the issues we're seeing in the Book Cliffs with habitat, our deer and elk populations. And that group met for about a year, and we actually have come up with a pretty good plan that has some strategies and activities that we've identified to begin implementation. The group will still continue to meet semi-annually to go over what's in the plan, what things we need to work on, but we've got a number of activities in the works for this current year, so we're anxious to get those implemented and try to make a difference for our rangelands and watersheds and wildlife populations in the Book Cliffs. So I'd like to thank Brett Prevedel. He's helped facilitate that group, and really appreciate his time in moving that group forward. I think that's all that I have to share for a regional update tonight, unless we have any other questions.
Thanks, Miles. Is there any questions from the RAC regarding Miles' update? Okay, we will roll into the next agenda item. And these are the items that had the videos from the specialists at DWR that you've all seen. And the way we'll do this is I'm going to, the first one's buck bulls and once in a lifetime recommendations. I will just briefly summarize the changes. Then I will turn it over to Miles for a summary of the public comment that has came in. Then we will open it up for questions from the RAC, and all the DWR biologists and specialists are on this call. So you can address them to the local biologist or to the individual that did the presentation, however you wish to do it. And then after that, after some discussion, then we'll move on to trying to come to a consensus and take a vote. So any questions on that process? Okay. All right. So for general season deer units, the summary is that there was no recommended increases in the state on any units. 10 units had no change recommended in the number of permits, and 19 units had a recommendation for decreased permits. The total permits being recommended are 80,725, which is a 9,175 permit reduction from 2019. On the premium limited entry hunts, which is the Henry Mountains and the Ponscot, there are no recommended changes. And that's for the limited entry permits and also for the management permits. The new hunt we had with the handgun archery muzzleloader shotgun units that we in the fall They did pass a wildlife board meeting, and they've limited them. There was 3 units, if you remember right, and there was one of them was the Book Cliffs, a portion of the Book Cliffs, and there's a recommendation to just have 5 permits in each of the 3 units for a total of 15. Recommending 100 limited entry deer permits, increase so overall. The spike bull elk and the any bull elk are open. The general season is remaining. The recommendation is 15,000 spike permits and 15,000 any bull permits, which is no change from the past. The youth bull elk permits, it's recommended at 500, which is no change. The summary of all the limited entry bull elk permits is virtually the same, but it's 2,938 was the previous number, and it's 2,943 now. And as we move forward into our region, there were some recommended changes, so we can address them individually. There was a recommended to increase 86 buck pronghorn permits, which gives the state a total of 1,147. Recommend adding 10 moose permits, full moose permits, which will give the state a total of 107. Bison permits, it was recommended that we reduce bison permits significantly from 242 to 115. And I know we'll address that later in the agenda also. The bighorn sheep increase of 10 from 56 to 66. Desert bighorn sheep increase of 13. And then the only other thing, the Rocky Mountain goat permits were basically stable. Recommended decrease of 4, which is from 126 to 122. With that, I'll turn it over to Miles for the public comment. And the process on this is they had an opportunity to view the same presentation that you did from the specialists, and then I believe you all saw the comments come in individually, but Miles will summarize them for us regarding the bucks, bulls, and once in a lifetime.
All right, thanks, Brett. It's a little surprising in this region. We only received 10 of electronic comments, so it's a little lower than I would have expected. So with that in mind, you just keep that in mind with this data. It's not a huge sample size, but nonetheless, 40% of the respondents supported the bucks and bulls and once in a lifetime recommendations. 40% were neutral, and then 20% opposed the proposal. You all had a chance to look at those comments, so I won't get into too much depth. I think there were a couple that maybe commented that they would like to see some reductions on deer tags and units that didn't have reductions, or maybe more reductions than was recommended. But that's the bulk of the comments. I think that I was able to decipher. So anyhow, I'll turn it back to you, Brett.
Okay, we also have had a few letters come in. The Mule Deer Foundation was in support of the recommendation. The Sportsmen's or Fish and Wildlife had a few specific recommendations. I'll just read through them just so you know what they were in regard to the bucks, bulls once in a lifetime. They were recommended less of an increase on the Fillmore Oak Creek bighorn sheep unit. They were recommending 10 instead of 14. Stansbury Mountain bighorn sheep unit, they would recommend leaving it at 3 instead of going to 5, which was recommended. Zion bighorn desert sheep, they were also recommending that it stay at 2019 numbers. And then Kaparowitz West and East Desert Bighorn sheep. They were recommending a different distribution of the permits on the east and west instead of the way it was recommended. And then they were opposed to the U hunt for the bighorn sheep that's proposed on the Newfoundland mountains. Jack Creek, Rocky Mountain Bighorn, they recommend leaving them permits at 3 as in the past also. And I believe that's all their comments on the bucks and bulls. So generally they were, I think, all the way through opposed to increasing tags. And there was a slight increase on all them units. The Utah Archery Association sent a letter in. They supported the recommendations with one exception, and that was the Bison Henry Mountains Archery permit, which has only 2 permits recommended. That way there would only be, one's a non-resident, one's a resident, and the preference point, the bonus point would not come into play if there was only 1 tag. So they were recommending that we had 2 tags, so one could go to the random draw and one to the high bonus point individual. I believe that's all the letters. We've got some other letters regarding Antlerless, but with that, we will open it up to questions from the RAC.
Yeah, this is Dan Abeda, and I have 2 questions. The first question is the significant reduction in bison permits, the proposed bison permits for this year, from 242 permits down to 115. I know that went up quite a bit last year. At least it seems like it increased quite a bit last year. And I guess I'm just looking for the rationale behind that decrease. I might have missed that.
Dan, I can speak to the Henrys if somebody else wants to speak to the buck cliffs. On the Henrys, yeah, you're right. We did get into those bison. We hit them pretty hard the last couple of years because of drought and other things. But then the other thing we saw on the Henrys, Dan, is our cow-calf ratios were some of the poorest we've ever seen. So whereas this drought that we saw impact deer and survival, we saw it impact bison differently. It just impacted them in their cow-calf ratio. So we ended up with 14 calves per 100 cows. Objective, we had to seriously reduce permits on the Henrys. And anybody from the region, Clint or Dax, like to speak on the buck cliffs.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. You guys might want to turn your volume down because I don't know how loud to talk into this thing. But and I'm kind of jealous of like Kobe's camera angle, like on the side. That's pretty classy. How many cameramen you got over there? Like 3 or 4. Anyway, as far as buck cliffs bison, Dan, it basically came down to trying to find new strategies to harvest bison in the right areas. So last year we had extremely high success in our hunts. We put a herd on those herds that are easily accessible in the roaded area, and the majority of our bison population is kind of residing in the roadless during the fall. And so if we kept our numbers where they were last year, we would probably continue to wipe out those herds that are easily accessible in the roaded area. So as you can see, if you look at our new hunt structure, we have a lot of new hunts, a lot of new ideas to try and take advantage of bison where they are, and not just keep putting the pressure on where we're going to probably even damage growing a healthy herd across the unit.
Clint, another question. Did the proposal from the Southeastern region on the over-the-counter bison tags, I know we haven't gotten to that yet in the agenda, but that proposal, did that factor in at all to the proposed decrease in bison tags on the book cliffs?
No. No, not, and Kobe'd be able to speak of that like more of a statewide level. But yeah, that's kind of a separate issue I think you're asking about there.
Clint, you nailed it. I mean, they're different bison. I understand that y'all have that big Book Cliffs Meta bison unit out there, but they're different bison that are crossing the river than that come in there. So.
Okay, and then thank you. And then the other question I had was related to the increase of Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep permits. Which units were those on? Which regions or units? That there's a 10 permit increase proposal.
They were on Rocky specifically.
Yes, on Rocky specifically.
Let me bring that up in the RAC packet really quick. But units across, a lot of those were on like the Oak Creeks, where last time we flew the Oak Creeks, we counted 70 rams. And Jace, correct me if I'm wrong, but how many of those, over 30 of those were class 3 or class 4 rams, which is so basically that was flight data that showed that we have a lot more sheep on that unit than we anticipated. They've grown, they've done well. And that's a unit, Dan, where we're actually worried about having too high of ram to ewe ratios and having those rams leave. And there's a lot of for disease surrounding the unit. And so man or ram to ewe ratio will keep all the sheep on the unit safe. A lot of increase there. Jace, am I missing any other big increases?
That's the only significant increase. The Pilot Mountains, we alternate years with Nevada. That was in Nevada's hands last year. It's in our hands this year. Small increases and small decreases across the rest of them. The only significant one is the Oak Creeks. We had a new flight, as Kobe said, counted 70 rams. 38 of them were class 3 and class 4, which basically rams that are 6 years old or older. And so that's the significant increase, going from 4 permits last year, recommending 14 permits in 2020.
I see. So none of those 10 Rocky Mountain permits are in the Northeastern region?
Increases? No, sorry. I can take it. Yeah, so no, not as far as increases. You have the North Slope units. We divided the units. Last year, there was 1 unit up there as North Slope that had 5 permits. It was split into 2 units this time around, and they're offering 2 permits in one and 3 in the other, so that's still 5 permits. The Avinaquin isn't being hunted, so no, none of those permits. And Dax or any of the biologists, if I'm missing any, jump in, but I don't think any of the increases are in Northeastern region.
We're actually down about 5 tags in the Northeast region on the on the Rocky Mountain Bighorn summary.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, guys.
Any other specific questions from the RAC? I'll maybe just take a moment, if there's no questions, and size on the hunts, kind of the changes that are in the Northeast RAC. On the general season buck deer, just looking at the units that are out here in the Northeast region, on Wasatch Mountains East, there was no recommended change. There was a reduction on the South Slope Vernal. There was a reduction on the South Slope Yellowstone, and on the 9 Mile, which is in the other region, but still out here, there was no recommended changes there. North Slope had a recommended reduction also. So there was no increases, a couple that stayed the same, and 4 units that decreased. That's general season buck deer. Any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, this is Brad Horricks. I'd like to go back to, what did the RAC, down there where there was increasing those sheep tags, what did that, in the region that RAC's in, have they had their meeting yet? And if so, how did they vote?
That was in the southern region. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kent, you were on that call as well. They, after they heard the explanation of why, Kent and Jace, they didn't make a motion to change it. They left it alone.
So I can summarize. So the 4 previous RACs, the central region did take one of those recommendations from SFW for the Zion unit, and they had a motion and passed to keep the permits the same as they were in 2019, which is actually an increase from what we are offering and we're recommending in 2020. And then the northern region did not do anything. The southern region had one motion that passed for the Comparowitz West unit to go to 12 permits, which is what we offered last year, as opposed to the 14 that we're recommending for 2020. And the southeastern region did not pass any motions on bighorn sheep permits. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Gotcha. Good.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no questions related to that or the general season buck deer, I'll just briefly summarize the limited entry deer in our region. South Slope Diamond Mountain has a slight increase. The Book Cliffs has a fairly significant decrease on all of the hunts, archery, muzzleloader, and any weapon. And I guess that's really the 2 limited entry deer units we have out here. And so the Diamond Mountains is a slight increase, and the Book Cliffs is a fairly significant decrease in the recommendations. Any questions from the RAC on limited entry buck deer? Okay. The hams hunt, as I mentioned, was recommended 5 tags for each of the 3 units, and 1 unit is the Book Cliffs Floyd Canyon unit at 5 tags. And then on the limited entry bull elk permits, summary, the Book Cliffs, there's a recommended reduction, about 20% reduction on all the hunts related to the limited entry bull elk. 9 Mile Antro is recommended to stay the same, and Diamond Mountain is recommended to stay the same. Wasatch Mountains also recommended to stay the same. So the summary there is some fairly significant changes in the Book Cliffs, and everything else is recommended to stay as it was. If I miss anything, feel free to jump in, any of the DWR employees.
If you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead. Please state, when you guys jump in, will you say your name so when they take minutes, they know who's speaking?
Yep, this is Daniel Davis. Would it be possible to let Covey show us how he modeled the general season deer proposals that they have going right now?
Covey, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I could do that. Only as long as we make sure that Daniel and everybody knows that this wasn't just me. This was the biologist. This was harder than me. But it started with the new deer plan. And when we did the new deer plan, we said we want to take into account using now. So 5 years ago, we really started to gear up and change our data and incorporate more into general season recommendations. these units are highly driven by an adult survival. In the past, and this is very similar to other wildlife agencies across the West, we've only been able to use buck-doe ratios, which it's still a great metric, and it still is the primary way that we manage and have some sort of indication of quality and harvest and what's going on in the landscape. Folks like Dax and Kent, and again, people really smarter than me, we're able to incorporate a lot more data now. So we put in a plan that we take into account adult and fawn survival. And let's just take one of the units that we're looking at there. I hope you're okay with this using your unit. If you have any comments on this after Randall, and we'd appreciate that. But we built this sheet, and it takes into account, it starts with the same data we've always used, the last 5 years of buck-doe ratios. Then we look at fawn-doe ratios and take that into account as well. Buck-doe, this 18 to 20 unit, right? So they're at the top end of it. Fawn-doe, we're a little low. We like to see that at 60. We're just, almost 50, but a little low this last year. Not terrible. With adult survival last year, it's 67%. And fawn survival at 24, we know we lost a lot of deer. Estimate that I'm highlighting now, we went from an estimate of 9,800 to 7,000. And so then we need to take into account what that means for buck permits. Well, the way we did that is we had everybody look at what was going on in their units and their collar data early, based on a few criteria, based on body weight and fat indices and fawn weight, what survival is going to look like. And honestly, on a lot of these, I think we really hit the mark. This is with new data that we're taking, we now have enough data to be more proactive than we've ever been in these recommendations. And just say anything about how we got it, what we were predicting for survival at the RAC.
Happy to if the RAC's interested.
It's a key component.
Okay. Yeah. So just, as Kobe mentioned and kind of went over what data we were using, the other part of that, instead of using the data that we have from the past, what we need to do to get this right is to project it forward. And so I'll start presenting on my screen here and show you some of that. Ultimately, what we're looking at is a couple things. Basically, as Kobe said, fawn survival and that fawn-doe ratio. That ratio we already know. So the next is we got to figure out what that fawn survival is. And the way we go about doing that is we've been GPS collaring adults and fawns since December of 2014 on the South Slope. And with that, we're collecting the overall fawn weight. And what we've seen is that fawn weight is one of the biggest drivers of what that survival will be. It's not just the fawn weight. We can have heavy fawns in a hard winter and we'll still see low survival. So it's actually the combination and the interaction of that fawn weight with the winter severity. And so if you look at some of this, and we'll go specific on the South Slope here. So this is the row of fawn weights for the South Slope. And you can see, early on we had really high weights and they have gone down a little bit since then. But overall, we do really well on the South Slope with weight. This past year, we averaged 67 pounds, which is pretty good, up a little bit from the previous year. But you can also see that even with decent weights last year, with that hard winter, we were down at only 24%. But the previous year, with a really light winter at 68 pounds, we were up at 75%. So it kind of bounces all over the place. And what we need to do is figure out what ultimately that is. So what we do is we have these plots over time. The x-axis here is days since December 1st. We start our collaring projects in December, and that's how we standardize everything. And that's when we consider them entering winter, and that's when we collect these data. And on the South Slope, you can see each line here represents a different year of survival. And in the hard winters that we had, this green line here, which is the winter of 16-17, and the winter of 18-19 is this blue line. You see how the fawns just really don't make it through winter very well. We get out to this day 100, 120, which is at March 10th, March 20th timeframe. And they just kind of gradually die during that, and then they level off once they get past that. In the lighter winters, we've had really great survival. And this is very adequate and really all overall good survival for fawns. And this year at the pink line, we're currently sitting at 71% on the unit as a whole. And that's actually been lower on the east side of the unit. We're a little better at that when we look at the Yellowstone. And I bet Randall probably has those numbers specifically. I just have it on a pooled basis. So ultimately what we look at is, where we're at with that survival and the trends. And so we see once we get to this point, we expect to level off and do really well and end up right around that 70% range, which is why we have it there on the sheet.
Perfect. And then I'll show you what that translates to in the recommendation, Ken, if you'll switch back. So what that translates to is the most proactive deer recommendation that we've ever made. And we feel very comfortable. We've made the appropriate cuts. And this is where the division is. The biologists, Randall, all the biologists worked really hard to make sure they got these right. So making this cut under this survival estimate, and the adults are surviving even much better than this estimate right now. I believe we're in the high 90s. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong there, but I believe the South Slope was at 98% adult dose survival. And when we had a lot of winter mortality, a lot of the older animals died. So we have a lot of prime age animals right now. Anyway, so we may come in even higher than this on survival. With average success, which is what we should anticipate when populations are down a bit, the buck-doe ratio. And so there's a lot of work put into this. I feel really comfortable with our general season recommendations where they are. Now, nothing's perfect, and we're going to look back on this a year and see where we hit the mark, where we missed the mark. But this is a lot more proactive than just looking back on buck-doe ratios to adjust. Now we're looking forward, and we can do that because of the data we have. So I hope that is informative to the RAC, and if you have any questions, please call your biologist. They'll talk these numbers over with you and what they did and how they did it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That was very informative. If there's no other specific questions from the RAC, I'll move on. Just a summary of the bison tags. Clint, I'd like you to jump in here if I say something incorrect, but in the book cliffs, it was mostly a redistribution of tags to the roadless area because of the very successful harvest in the roaded year. A slight reduction for all, but most of them statewide, big reduction, and the bison tags was in the Henry Mountains. And so we're down on the recommendation a little bit, but there's still a significant amount of tags in the roadless area, and including some new hunts in the roadless area. Is that accurate, Clint, to say it that way?
Absolutely. Yep, sounds great.
Okay. Bull moose, there was very little recommended change in the Northeast region. It's pretty much stable. Mountain goat is the same. We have some units that do real well and some units that just have a token amount of tags in there. And there's very little recommended change in the Northeast unit. And then we already talked about the bighorn sheep, so I will not revisit that unless there's specific questions. So, are there any more questions from the RAC specific to the presentations or numbers?
This is Jamie.
Question. This is Joe Arnold. Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay. Jamie, go ahead and start.
All right. I was just kind of curious about the harvest success for the 2019 season on moose in the Wasatch and the South Slope Yellowstone. because we see decreases in some of these areas for bucks and bulls, but the moose hasn't changed. So I was just wondering if that's because there was a low harvest or if just the populations were doing great.
Kent, do you have that data, Kent or Randall?
I will get it.
Randall, I know you're on here. Do you want to address in general your feelings on the moose on the South Slope?
Sure. On the Yellowstone last year, we were at 75% success on the hunts last year, which is out of the 4 hunters that went. That's, you know, essentially we've got one that didn't harvest on that kind of an option there. The Wasatch Mountains, let me bring it up here on my stuff.
Just, I can speak overall. Just overall, we harvested 159 bulls in the state with 173 hunters, so very high success. You know, unlike deer, moose don't mind hard winters. It actually can be helpful, especially in these southern units where we have winter tick issues. You actually see a big effect of fewer ticks the following year because of a hard winter. So, yeah, overall, moose they're pretty stable, slightly growing in the state.
Jamie, on the South Slope too, on the Yellowstone, it did fit in right with we set our bull permits based on average age up there too of harvest, and they're right where we want them to be right now, and so that's part of where we set those. If we would have adjusted those numbers, it would have been based on the average age of harvest from last year. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Joe Arnold, did you have a question?
Yeah, and maybe not right for this particular time, but so this data is all gathered and it's quite late before it's gathered, and yet we put in for the permits in February. Is there something that maybe, you know, the Oak Creek unit, if somebody's sitting on a whole bunch of Bighorn sheep points, that this data is gathered and presented and passed before we put in for it, so that there could be some higher success ratio, or, you know, there on those particular units, and we're putting in for units that are decreasing before we're even approved. So I don't know the answer. I'm just wondering if that's something that's talked about, because these are for 2020 permits, right?
No, Joe, that's correct, and it's a fair criticism. We the timeline of everything, the way it works out, the draw opens before we have permit recommendations or decisions in, and we're working on it. I know Lindy presented a couple different ideas to help adjust that. It's more complicated than that. I'm not as involved in the draw process. We're the biologists, and we do the biology. There's a lot more to the draw process that I probably am not very well equipped to speak on. If there's any way that we can have them be more synchronous, or we're working towards that, and may be able to move that way in the future. But it's more complicated than just that. So.
Okay, yeah, I know the data has to, probably the winter has to happen and so forth in order to see the survival rates and all that. So I'm just wondering if maybe the draw could be pushed back a little bit where they don't take place until the fall, but just a thought going forward.
No, that's fair, and we'll continue to take that into consideration.
That's a good point, Joe. I had the opportunity to see a presentation from Lindy up at the Wildlife Board meeting, and how everything comes together on the year for the applications, and collecting the money and analyzing them and putting out the draw results, and then still having the 30-day window for people to turn back tags. And she literally had 3 days between January and July that were not fully occupied with timelines. And so it's fairly complicated. I had no idea until I saw that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's try to get this rolling along, and I would open this for discussion. If anybody has any ideas of whether they want to proceed with it, or let's not have a motion right now, but let's have your thoughts on the bucks, bulls, and once in a lifetime, how we want to proceed and move on. RAC members.
You know, I'd like just to make this is Brad Horricks, and I'd just like to make a comment. It seems like that, you know, the most complaints that I have received about any of our units around here locally is the Book Cliff elk unit. And I'm just making that comment, just, you know, the quality of the elk out there and deer both seems to be the number one complaints that I receive, you know, and it's just making a comment.
I believe on the elk, Clint, you and I had that discussion, and that's why you reduced recommended tags. Is that correct?
Yes, Brett, it is. Clint Sampson, wildlife biologist. Yeah, absolutely. We are hearing the same things, Brad. We're pouring a lot of resources into the book list right now when it comes to habitat projects, and then also with all the collaring that is going on out there too. We're learning a lot of as far as production and trying to jumpstart both the deer and the elk herds out there.
There's about a 20% reduction recommended in both bull and buck tags throughout all the different hunts on the book list. Any other comments from the RAC?
I guess I've got more of a question for to start off with the first, and anybody could answer this if you would. Have we ever seen a trend where we've been able to monitor any of these animal weights leading up to hunting season? You know, they're gearing up for winter, and once we get through the hunting season, you know, they get some pressure, you know, and I know we're doing a lot of resources to collar and do all that, but the perception is that there's a lot of pressure during that time frame, particularly with the book cliffs. Do we have any idea what those body conditions tend to do, or any impact on those by chance?
That's hard to get at, Daniel, but I would answer it this way. A lot of times when we harvest bucks in October, mature bucks still have really a lot of fat on them. And so and they've been hunted since August all the way up through October, and they're putting on fat. It seems like the thing that really burns fat on bucks, and if any of the biologists want to jump in after this, I'd appreciate it. But it seems like the thing that really burns fat when we're talking about deer and on bucks is the rut. Pressure from humans, and more that desire to breed, that competition to breed. Bucks in December, they're skinny. They've lost all that fat that they had when you harvest them in October. But is there anybody else that would add to that, or any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just come at it from a doe component as well, since that's what we're collecting the fat on in December. You know, the reality is the way does work is they're in the skinniest shape in that April-May timeframe, and they're not gaining weight in that spring time frame because they're in the third trimester. They're putting that final energy into the fetus development, and then after they give birth, they're still not putting on weight in the spring like bucks do. They're putting that energy into lactation, and the more energy they get, they don't put it into themselves. They put it into that fetus, and so they'll have heavier fetuses, and the heavier you can make them at birth, the better they're going to survive. And so, and then they pretty much spend all summer just kind of producing milk and lactating to mainly to take care of their offspring rather than actually themselves. They don't get a chance to put on weight until those fall months. But again, as Kobe said, it's not so much the the pressure from hunters and moving them around that's causing lack of weight gain or anything like that. It's just the quality of the forage and the overall, whether they have those fawns or whether they don't have any, or what they got going on with their life and what time of life, what the life cycle is like for them during that time of year.
Thank you.
So you would, yeah. The more critical time frame for the doe, cow, fawn, calf survival then is going to be the springtime. This ability to get that's coming out through the winter then, correct?
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, the data shows the fatter they can be in December, the fatter they'll be come March and spring. And the fatter they are in spring, better their offspring are going to be. And then the heavier they'll be going into winter. And so it's a year-round cycle. There's lag effects. So if you have a really hard winter, if you noticed on that south slope data, we had low fawn to doe ratios this year, and that likely, we can't say it, I guess, specifically there, but we saw it on the cash unit where they were really poor shape, we had really hard winter. Those fawns were really small when they were born. That contributed to lower fawn weights. And so it's some of the stuff's out of our control. Those hard winters just take a big toll. Those droughts take a big toll. But what we can control by making good habitat and getting good forage out there really pays dividends, and it kind of can have benefits all year round. And it's generally, when they're using the most energy is that winter time period. And that's when we try and restrict the activities on WMAs and things like that to try and give them a break, because they are, they're fighting nature and they're going to lose weight regardless. And if we can keep that at a minimum, the better off we're going to be.
And I think, just to Kent's point, the reason why we see higher mortality in the spring is just because they didn't have enough fat reserves in December to make it through that spring and duration of winter and everything else that happens. But it's complicated, Daniel. But you're right. We have the potential to lose a lot of animals in the spring. They just may not have enough gas to get through.
Daniel, Randall Thacker, to chime in on that. Last year on this Yellowstone, anyway, that we were talking about, it was that late spring. We had deep snow until June on some of our winter ranges last year. That spring. So last year, that was definitely the factor. Was that spring unavailable? The resources that weren't available to them to get out and hit that. There was no early green up to help them recover from that the winter losses. So yeah.
Thank you. Are any other comments from the RAC? If not, we'll move into requesting a motion on bucks, bulls, and once in a lifetime tags.
This is Natasha. I'd like to make a motion to pass the bucks, bulls, and once in a lifetime proposal as presented today.
We have a motion.
This is Brad.
Go ahead.
I'd like to second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to pass the bucks, bulls, once in a lifetime permit recommendations as presented by the DWR. We will take a vote on that. Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
And Mike?
Yes.
Okay, we have unanimous approval of that item. And we'll move right into the antlerless permit recommendations. A brief summary of our region. There's not many doe tags in the region, but there is the new hunt on South Slope Bison, which was 100 permits, 2 deer each permit, and that was a a targeted hotspot for chronic wasting disease to try to take the density of the deer down. On the other units, there's a few tags out in 9 Mile. That's not in our region technically, but there's a few tags out there, and there's really no other antlerless deer tags in the Northeast region that I can see. Doe pronghorn, I believe the pronghorn are doing well, and there are some doe pronghorn tags. There's 20 out on South Slope, Bonanza, Diamond Mountain, and there's about 15 up on the North Slope, actually 20 up on the North Slope. And I believe that's similar to prior year. I don't have the prior year data. And then on the antlerless moose hunt, there is 10 tags on the North Slope. I believe that's consistent with prior years. Is that correct, Amy?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Brett?
On the antlerless moose, the 10 tags that are recommended on the North Slope, is that consistent with other years? Is that just a same number?
So the North Slope cow moose permits are actually in the northern region. They're on the Summit subunit.
Okay.
So they're not in our region, but I believe they've had cow moose permits there in the past. At least this past year they started.
It is consistent, Brett. That's no increase, no decrease, same number.
Okay, and then there's the Bighorn ewe hunt that had a few comments come in opposition to it on the Newfoundland Mountains, which is a new hunt, which is recommended 10 tags for Bighorn ewes. And then antlerless elk, there's a few here in the region that one is the new tags, the new cow elk hunt on the Book Cliffs, which I'm going to ask Clint to talk about briefly. And then the other cow elk tags are consistent on the South Slope and the Diamond Mountain. North Slope, West Daggett. We had some comments come in. They've been cut significantly, and I believe they're fairly content with the recommendations. But there was a petition signed by pages of people to get that reduction in, and I know Amy and Dax met with the concerned individuals up there and concern and the recommendation. They're very, very low numbers, and they're also muzzleloader hunts, which have low success. So I believe they've addressed that concern. And with that, I will let Miles talk about the public comments on that, on the antlerless.
Okay, again, not a lot of respondents on the online comments for this region, but those that did respond, 40% of those opposed to the proposal as presented, 30% supported, and 30% were neutral. And I think the comments that Brett brought up just a minute ago, some of those issues, I think were some of those that were mentioned in those online comments. One of being the Book Cliff cow elk hunt. So I think that's pretty straightforward based on the amount of data that we received for the public on this one.
Thank you. Clint, would you discuss that antlerless elk hunt on the Book Cliffs, your rationale?
Oh, you bet. So a lot of it is just coming down to what we've learned since we've started to collar elk out in the Book Cliffs. This year, thankfully, we had a lot higher pregnancy rate than we had last year. It was up in the high 80s. So compared to, the mid 50s is what we had last year. So that's encouraging. And I know this is kind of a tough sell because we are, quite a bit under objective when it comes to the Book Cliffs elk herd, and we could be butting up against our carrying capacity possibly. But the other thing we learned with our elk study out there is that we have some old cows out there in the Book Cliffs, and we're trying to increase the productivity. So all the elk that hopefully get harvested this year, we can age their teeth and try to find out if maybe this is an effective way to try and bring down the overall age of those cows, the ones that aren't producing, that aren't adding to our population anymore. Maybe try to bring that down and create maybe more of a positive reproductive rate out in the Book Cliffs, because it is still a little bit of a mystery why we're not growing elk at the rate we should according to our models. And we have cut, it does show a significant increase when it comes to the public draw permits, but we have scaled back on the amount of private depredation antlerless permits we give in the Book Cliffs too. So it's not quite as drastic as it looks there on paper, seeing the 225, but I'll leave this open to Dax too. He was very helpful when it came to this recommendation as well.
Would you like to add anything to that, Dax?
Yeah, maybe I'll just share a couple additional things. We had a pretty good conversation about this hunt recommendation last night with the Southeastern region RAC, and some of the things that came up. The work that, done by that Book Cliffs committee, and looking at the forage demand utilization on our summer range, especially in the Book Cliffs, was some of the things that came that we looked at quite a bit here. We definitely have a lot of demand for a pretty limited amount of forage. And like Clint mentioned, we're seeing body conditions and pregnancy rates in elk and age class in elk that's kind of concerning. There's some research out there that shows that pregnancy rates in elk really drop off after elk get older than 9 years old. We're talking pregnancy rates on cow elk younger than 9, in the 90% range, and pregnancy rates on cow elk older than 9 in like the 60% range. And so we saw a lot of old elk, low pregnancy rates, and some of the things we observed indicated that we might be coming up against the carrying capacity. We may have more demand for habitat than we have out there. And so some of the things we're trying to do is to maybe temporarily reduce numbers and get a better idea of what's going on. Are we really approaching a carrying capacity issue? If we are, we don't want to do long-term habitat damage. And we want to see what kind of an age structure we have in that population. You can kind of make the analogy, if you were a cattleman and you had a bunch of old cows that weren't having calves anymore, and you had a limited amount of feed, limited amount of pasture, those would be ones you'd sell those to the beef market, make burger out of those cows, and keep more of your younger cows that are more productive. And so it's a combination of things, but it's managing that population, it's looking at that age class, and I think it can help us answer some questions and see what are the limiting factors to that elk population out there. Another thing that came up in last night's meeting was if you look at our modeled population numbers for the Book Cliffs elk population, it's 1,000 less this year than it was the year before. And actually, that's more of a model correction than it is an actual drop in population. As we're getting better and better data, we're realizing that some of the metrics we were using to model the population in the past were not accurate. And so just so you know, that elk population is not necessarily dropping like crazy. It just seems to be kind of stagnant. But if you look at the modeled number, it might look like it's dropping, but it's actually not dropping. It's just, that was a model correction.
And Dax, that herd objective has never been reached, and it might not be exactly where we want it. Is that correct?
So we're still looking at that, and I think, you know, there's a lot of things we can do to increase available habitat to elk. We've done a lot of habitat work in the Book Cliffs, a lot of water development, and we are seeing, I think if you talk to a lot of sportsmen, guys that spend a lot of time in the Book Cliffs, we are seeing more elk in some of the lower elevation areas where we've done a lot of that water development. So I don't know that the population objective is necessarily unobtainable, but I think it might take some work and some creativity to get there. And that's just part of what we're looking at. But you know, everything's on the table. We want to we just want to make sure that we manage these populations responsibly and don't do, you know, long-term habitat damage in some of these really high demand, high use areas.
Okay, thank you. Amy, can I put you on the spot to explain the West Daggett situation a little bit and what's going on with the herd? Because I know the RAC, I didn't know much about it until this week. And I know the RAC could be interested in what you've got going on up there in elk permits.
Sure. So this is Amy Vandevort. For the elk up there, we're below objective on our winter counts. And we have been for a few years. So this year, to address the concerns of the hunters that we had, we cut out all of the late season hunts. So we don't have any more left in like December and January. We did keep the muzzleloader hunts that are earlier in the year that have low success. And we did keep the hunts that are around Greendale Junction, just because those help to keep the elk pushed off the highway so you don't see a lot of roadkill or vehicle collisions along there. And also from what we see, there are elk up there. We have a ton of summer range, and it's more summer range in the West Daggett than there is winter range. So we have elk there during the summer and earlier in the hunts. It's just they've been getting pushed off during the winter. So we cut back on all those late season hunts, and we're hoping that the elk will stay there now instead of leaving. And then one other thing I can add too is about 5-6 years ago, we had 3 radio collars on cow elk on the Greendale herd. And the elk aren't dying, they're just leaving the unit. What we saw when the hunt started is that they just left. Once they started getting pressure, they left to the vernal unit, but then come spring, they came right back to the north slope. So the elk are still there, they're just leaving the unit when we do our winter counts.
Okay, thank you. One other interesting thing I learned up there is on the private lands tags, which you've recommended a significant cut to. They were not typical private lands tags up there, right? They were more organized.
Some of them were typical private lands tags. Some of them, you know, some of the landowners did get more organized. But we've actually just been looking at the harvest the past couple of years and just adjusting the private lands only tags to what we see we need for the harvest, to get what we need for the harvest. You know, we're hoping these 40 tags will cover what we need, but if not, if we get a lot of landowners requesting vouchers next year, we may increase them again, just so we're not doing all the paperwork for the depredation program.
Thank you. What I was referring to for the RAC is there was 120 tags there last year, but there was an organized, it was kind of an outfitting type situation as opposed to a depredation. And it was perfectly legal, but I mean, they were using that as an available hunt for access and clients. And we haven't seen that where we have the private lands tags in the Uinta Basin that I'm aware of. Thank you, Amy. We've already addressed the public comments. Any questions or comments from the RAC?
I just have a question. This is Jamie, in regards to the antlerless deer permits on the south slope. If we can just get a little bit, I think it was Randall that's ahead of that. I just kind of want to get some understanding if it's just to maintain population numbers.
Are you talking about the new hunt, the 100 tags?
Yes. Yes.
Randall, you want to address that, or Dax? Who's the one that wants to address that?
Sure, I'll take a start at it, and Dax can add in if he would like. Yeah, Jamie, I guess it's not to maintain the population. We hope to actually reduce some deer density down there. If you've seen the boundary, it's just the area around Mighton towards Roosevelt and south, and also includes Pleasant Valley. In the last 4 years, we've had 5 or 6 positive CWD samples come in from there, where we hadn't seen any in that area before. And so we're getting a little concerned about that area having a high deer density, which it does. There's quite a few agricultural deer down there. And so we've had some complaints from some agricultural folks there too, getting some depredation concerns. We also have had a lot of folks comment that they get a lot of vehicle deer accidents, of course, roadkill type situations down there too. So our hope is to kind of start this off as an experiment to see if we can reduce the deer density a little bit down there. They're very resident deer. They don't leave that area hardly at all. They're resident animals that are in that area. And so we're hoping to target them. We'll also be sending a letter to every one of those 100 people who do get those tags to strongly encourage them and to have them take those animals in to get tested for CWDs. We hope to get a really good sample for that area and for the CWD monitoring to see if it really is a problem or if it's just a fluke that it's starting to, it's shown up there in the last few years. And so we really hope to get some increased samples that way from it and see what's going on there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Kobe, could I ask you to address the Bighorn U hunt? There was some comments, and it just seems as valuable as they are. It's surprising to see that.
I would love to. I'll address it, and then also Jace is on the line too, and I'm asked Jace to jump in at the end of it. But so what we have is we have 3 California bighorn herds in the state. We have one on the Oak Creeks, one on the Newfoundland Mountains, and one on the Stansbury Mountains. The population on the Oak Creeks and the population on the Stansburys are both doing great. So we're left with the population on the Newfoundlands, which is doing almost even better. They're approaching the population objective. There are a lot of sheep out there. And so we have to start to manage that number. Now, transplanting it's always an option, right? And we could transplant those to the Oak Creeks, but it doesn't really make sense because we have a lot of issues there as well. And I guess when I say issues, what I mean is potential for disease. Or we have the Stansburys. But every transplant we do has risk for bighorn sheep. And we're learning more and more all the time. Every time we transplant bighorn sheep, it seems like you end up with a lot of sleepless nights because it seems like they just go like popcorn the first couple of days. Now that we've really invested in collars to look at what they do, when we move them off, move them to a new unit, we don't know what they're going to do. And what I'm trying to say is every time we move them, we assume a lot of risk. Because if one of those sheep goes down and gets into an area with disease and then comes back, able to kill off that whole herd. Specifically on the Stansburys, not very many years ago. Within 3 weeks, we lost upwards of 90% of that population. We had one animal bring back disease, and we lost 90% of that population. Now, that wasn't from a transplant per se, but again, what we do know is every time we transplant them, we increase the risk that those animals will wander off. So that's one of the big factors that we look at. Another factor is the time and effort to catch in the Newfoundland Mountains it's really hard. It's all military restricted airspace. That's where the Air Force goes and practices. So we plan a capture and we work through all the details to get into the restricted airspace. And then they decide they have a training event, they cancel our capture. And we got to go back. And sometimes it's canceled for an hour, sometimes it's canceled for a day, sometimes it's canceled for a year. And so as we approach that population objective, bringing sheep off the Newfoundland Mountains can be really, really tough to coordinate. So between the additional risk and the complications of capture on that range, it makes more sense to harvest those animals. And U hunting is something we're going to have to get used to as a state as we start to approach population objectives to maintain healthy herds. And I think, it's just the first place where we're reaching that, bringing some hesitation with it. But really, it's what makes most sense. Jace, would you add anything to that?
Nope, nothing really to add. Translocations are a really valuable tool and have been very successful for us in the state. But in this case, we don't think that it's worth the time, worth the money, and worth the risk in this particular situation. So we'd rather hunt them. I will add this: just like Kobe said, I think this is something to be excited about. The fact that the Newfoundland Mountains has a population objective of 350, and that we're approaching that and reaching that, that's exciting. And you look at a lot of other Western states, and I know this is our first U hunt, but many other Western states have U hunts. Some states that have a lot more bighorn sheep, some of them even harvest more ewes than they do rams. And it seems like those people, they get a good number of applicants. Those people have a good experience, And so I think this is an exciting thing. And many other times we will do transplants because it's worth the time, worth the money, worth the risk. But in this case, this situation, we don't think it is. So we're excited for this. We hope that Utahns are as well.
Thank you. All right, is there any more questions or comments from the RAC regarding the antlerless permit recommendations?
Yeah, this is Brad Horricks. If you wanted to put in for one of those U tags, how does that work on your point system, or is it totally separate from your RAM, or do you acquire points for it, or how does that work?
First of all, Brad, I guess I'd just like to say that I love the doll photo there. No, turn it back. It's way better to look at that, Brad, than this. I'm just kidding. Hey, there's another good looking sheep, Brad. Next RAC meeting is at Brad's office. Can everybody agree to that? So, all right. Yeah, Brad, it's a separate point system, a completely separate point system. It's a point system. If you draw one of these U tags, there's a 5-year waiting period before you can put in again. It's not like, nanny goat or cow moose. There's not a lot of sexual dimorphism between cow bison. There's not a lot of sexual dimorphism between a cow bison or a nanny goat, and so those are all one lifetime. But with cow moose or with ewe bighorn sheep, different from a ram, and so it uses a separate point system. Limited entry, 5-year waiting period to get back in.
Thank you.
Okay, I would entertain a motion on the antlerless permit recommendations or any alteration you'd like on them.
This is Brad Horricks, and I'd like to go ahead and make the recommendation that we accept the division's recommendations on this.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Dan Abeda, and yeah, I would make a motion that we second. I second Brad's motion.
We have a motion and a second to approve the antlerless permit recommendations as presented. We'll go through a roll call. Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous. That's our agenda. It should speed up from here. Do we need to take a short break, or should we keep plugging through it?
Keep
Everybody
going.
good? Everybody's good? Okay, the next item on the agenda is the CWMU rule amendments. And Chad, are you on with us?
Yes, I am.
So I don't have to look for it in my packet here. Could you just summarize briefly? Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Brad. Sorry I'm late, but I'm in.
Okay. Jeff Taniguchi has joined the meeting.
Yeah, a lot of the changes were just housekeeping, but probably the one worth speaking about is we're allowing cow reciprocal tags, the ability for that to happen on CWMUs. And the other part was clarifying language that we don't have to manage on a general season unit. If that CWMU is in a general season unit, they can manage towards a higher quality, like a higher age class of elk or a higher buck-doe ratio for deer. There was a couple more. Now he put me on the spot. Just clarified that, made some clarifications that the public hunters would never go below that minimum threshold, specifically on pronghorn. That was kind of overlooked before.
Okay. And so how did you, in the past, on the quality or age class of the animals, did you collect data from the harvested animals on the CWMU? Or how
No,
did you?
Yeah, this really isn't going to change how we've been practicing it. It just clarifies it in rule. This is how we've been handling those units all along.
Okay. Miles, was there any public comment other than the pie charts? Would you like to address them?
Well, public comment, it was 30% supported the proposal and 70% was just neutral. No one opposed the proposal in this region, and I don't recall any specific comments.
I don't either. Are there any questions by the RAC? Or comments? Okay, on the first CWMU item, which is the rule amendments, I would open it for a motion. Item 7 on the agenda.
This is Natasha. I make a motion to accept the changes to the CWMU rule as proposed.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
This is Rebecca Jones, and I second her motion.
Okay. Second, we will again do a roll call. The motion is to approve the CWMU rule amendments as proposed. Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And Jeff? You still with us, Jeff? Jeff is not with us momentarily. I saw his computer logged off. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations. And in summary on that, there was some renewal applications and some change applications that go through the Wildlife Board. We do not have to address the changes on them. There's 66 CWMUs with antlerless permits for the 2020 season. And then they have a table that it's 90%, most all of the in the state choose the option to be 90% public, 10% private on the antlerless tags. So there's 189 tags that are available to the CWMUs, and there's 1,089 that will go to the general draw. And that's the antlerless. Then on the, I guess I don't have the numbers for you on the other one, on the regular tags, the bucks and bulls. Do you have anything to add on that, Chad, or anything that's came up in the other RAC meetings?
Yes, I do. The antlered was already passed in the fall, so that's why you're not seeing those.
Okay.
But there are a couple of clarifications that I need to make that, or corrections, not even clarifications, that have come up since, well, it was the last two RACs have heard this. The first two did not, but we just got some verification on some of these numbers, and the actual numbers for this is, as you see on this graph, east and east should be 40 less cow elk tags, and then these three southeast, Roan Cliffs, Indian Head, and Jump Creek were also supposed to be less elk tags on that. So it just brings the new totals, as you see down there: 172 private, 1,033 public, and 1,205 total tags.
Okay, thank you. This is a real positive program, isn't it? With
Yeah.
the 90-10 split.
Yeah, the public really gets the benefit of these antlerless tags. So, I mean, you can see how many public tags there are compared to private.
Yes, thank you. Are any questions or comments from the RAC? Okay, I will open it for a motion regarding the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations for 2020.
Natasha, I'll make a motion to accept the CWMU antlerless recommendations as proposed.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second the motion. This Richie, I'll second the motion.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations as proposed. I'll do a roll call. Dan? Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Are you there, Jeff? I saw him.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're on a trend here. We're having a lot of yeses tonight. The next item is the management bison hunts on the 9 Mile Range Creek unit. And I would like Dax or whoever, actually Brad, it's in the other region, Brad Crompton, to just give us an overview of that, please.
You bet. This is Brad Crompton. I work in the Southeast region. The short version of this is that we're asking the RAC and the Wildlife Board to approve changes to rule to allow for an over-the-counter bison hunting opportunity, and then specifically ask for a hunt this fall on the 9 Mile Range Creek unit. This is to address some bison issues on that unit where bison migrate to there each winter. There's quite a lot of concerns over, private landowners and public land grazers with forage availability for their livestock and things like that. So we're trying to address that issue. Also, there's no management plan on the 9 Mile Range Creek unit, so the population objective is 0, and we're trying to manage to that objective. This strategy is just meant to be super flexible. So if bison show up, it makes it very easy for a hunter to at least and have the opportunity to harvest. I don't believe we'll harvest a ton of bison, but it may act to push a lot of bison back to tribal lands. That will be very, very difficult. Very remote country, mostly roadless. A very, very difficult hunt, and hunters lose their bonus points when they purchase this tag.
And I believe that means they lose their ability to put in for bison once in a lifetime tags. Is that correct?
Right. And maybe one more thing I might add is but prior to purchasing this permit, they have to take an online education course about it, just so they know all the ramifications. It's a very difficult hunt with likely very low hunt success, and that they'd lose their points, wouldn't be able to put in for a Book Cliffs or Henry Mountain bison tag anymore. But the flip side is they can purchase this sort of tag year in and year out. They could hunt the following year, as long as this hunt is available.
Even if they're successful?
Even if they're successful.
Okay. Is there questions from the RAC for Brad?
Yeah, Daniel Davis here. Are these going to be permits? Are these going to be cow or bull choice, or are they going to be cow permits only?
That's a good question. Once again, just to maximize flexibility, we make them hunter's choice, so that you can shoot a cow or a bull.
Yeah. This is Brad Horricks. I'd heard some conversation about letting them use maybe helicopters to haul people in and out and their animals. Is that still a possibility?
Most of that area down there is in now wilderness area in the Emery County portion of that. So helicopters can't land in wilderness areas. So really, I don't know. There's a whole lot of opportunity for helicopter sort of hunting. The main access points is floating the river, floating Desolation Canyon, or there's some fairly very rugged roads that get into Lower Range Creek or Upper Range Creek, and then it's walk in from there. It's horseback or on foot. So it'll be difficult.
Everybody got a good understanding of what's being proposed?
Daniel Davis again. What Range Creek, we look at a lot of these hunt maps and hunt tables, but which base this demographic on to be more precise to the Range Creek? Currently, there's nothing for the bison. Have a suggestion on what map might reference that area a little bit better?
If I understand your question right, where specifically are we talking about? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, basically the boundaries of where this hunt would take place, because currently there's nothing listed under the bison. When you look at antlerless elk and elk, things do vary.
Yeah, a good point. You could reference the any bull for the 9 Mile Range Creek unit. It's the same hunt boundary, which is 9 Mile Creek over to Highway 191 and Highway 6 down to I-70. It's a large area. However, the bison are only in a very small part of the unit. These bison aren't unit wide. They're not. They're just in kind of the southeast corner of the unit.
Jamie, do you want an opportunity to speak, or I thought you might?
Yeah.
Well, I just have a question. And I guess I want to just get clarification. I think you've already mentioned this, is if they buy the permit, they're ineligible to, in years after this, to apply for the, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, they lose their once in a lifetime bison points. However, this is a different type of permit to where they could buy this permit on subsequent years, but they lose their opportunity to apply for a once in a lifetime bison tag.
Okay.
Joe, did you have a comment? I thought you'd mic'd in for a moment.
Yes, I just curious about, do you feel like with offering that, and so me as a once in a lifetime non-bison person, you feel like you'll get a lot of traction there because they are going to lose their bison points? I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's appealing to the bison people, and it would be appealing to all of us that have other once in a lifetime areas that were, you know, goats or sheep or moose. Is that right? Anybody can apply for this hunt, correct?
Correct. You can just go buy one over the counter. Yeah, you hit on a good point. I think folks with 20 bison points most likely have no interest in buying this tag because you know they're waiting for another one. Really, the goal of this, once again, is just maximum flexibility. So we really get these tags in the hands of the few hardy people that know what they're doing down there. You know, it's this hunt. Yeah, just those folks that know the country. You know, have access to horses. That and yeah, those few. You know, hopefully the education course will deter a lot of the folks that really don't know what they're getting into.
And Joe, if I could add to this, so one of the things, sorry, the name comes up as Joe. One of the things, if I can add to this, is that we looked at doing this several different ways. If you harvest, you lose your points. If this, if that, is consistency. So right now, if you buy a conservation permit for any species, if you draw an expo tag for any species, if you buy a moose permit on a CWMU, or you buy that permit over the counter, you lose your ability to put in for the draw for that species. And it's just because they're so rare. And so the way we've done it in Utah is if you have the opportunity, you lose your points. And this would be the opportunity. Now, you can buy a conservation permit year after year. You can buy a moose permit year after year. Be super lucky if you drew an expo permit year after year. But it's just consistent with everything else we do. And so that's the rationale behind why we recommended it this way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the RAC?
Before you get too far, Brad, on this one, I can go ahead and outline some of the public comments.
Sorry about that. I forgot you.
So on this one, 40% of the respondents opposed it, 40% supported it, and then 20% were neutral. Certainly some of the people thought that it was beneficial. That's not an actual bison unit. There's been a lot of issues with that. And then other people felt like, yeah, we need to have more bison in the state of Utah. So that's kind of the range that the comments came from. But I think in the presentation, Brad certainly discussed the ramifications for having bison over there. So that's kind of a summary of the public comments.
Thank you.
This is Jamie. I do want to make one comment. This is a problem that has their own committee, just similar to the Book Cliffs Committee. There is a 9 Mile Bison Committee that the tribe participates on. And I have a bison manager who oversees our bison program. And this did come up in a vote, and just want to put it out there that we didn't support this. the Ute Tribe Bison Management Program didn't support this. And just kind of just want to put it out there that it was brought up in the 9 Mile Bison Committee meeting. Thanks.
What was
Jamie?
the position of the of the 9 Mile Committee overall?
This is Brad with the Division of Wildlife. Yeah, the overall committee voted to go forward with this sort of proposal. There were several, and I don't know all of them, but yes, representatives from the Ute Tribe opposed it, and also there's a property owner, the Utah Museum of Natural History, that also opposed that proposal. You know, there could be some additional trespass on those properties. So there were several people that opposed. It wasn't unanimous.
Can the area be accessed without crossing their property?
Portions of the area, yes. Yeah, there's significant areas where bison reside that aren't on those museum properties, but the museum properties are, there's a lot of bison in there as well. So. But there is a program through the museum where you can get access permits and walk in there online.
How did the Southeast RAC vote on this?
It passed last night. Kobe, was it unanimous? I don't recall.
I believe it was unanimous, actually. It passed. It did pass. So, but they had a lot of discussion on it, and I understand there's some hesitancy. And we're trying to manage this as best we can, represent the majority of the committee, but we also are sympathetic and understand that it's the best we can do to manage it for zero bison, which is what we've agreed to do at this time.
Hi, this is Joe Arnold. Is there a quota? Is there a harvest objective? How many tags will be sold? Any of that?
No, it's just open. Yeah. In the presentation it was kind of outlined, but it's a pretty narrow window of opportunity just due to weather and terrain. So yeah, the weather will kind of induce this quota pretty quickly, when you just can't get there anymore. But yeah, we won't limit either harvest or permit sales.
This is Dan Abeta, and I've got a kind of maybe a comment, maybe even a question. As I understand this, Brad, if this is a successful hunt, I mean, this is kind of in I guess in maybe a reaction to what animals are doing that isn't desired. But if this hunt is successful, this would actually possibly keep the bison where we want them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a goal. We've found on the Henry Mountains where boy, they respond to hunting pressure and they go where the people with guns are not. And
yeah,
we put some pressure on them. They go back to the tribal lands where where they ought to be in this case.
So if this is successful, then potentially this hunt could go away.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to speak on the RAC?
Brett, this is Richie. I just have a question for Jamie. What would the tribe or what's their proposal for the elk in this area? Or what would they like to see done with the elk in this area?
We don't have a say as far as what happens in this area because it's off of our tribal exterior boundary, and that's part of the problem. But as for elk, I don't believe we don't have a stand on that.
I believe he was referring to bison, weren't you, Richie?
Yes, strictly on the bison. What was your proposal, the tribe's proposal for the mitigation of the bison in the Range Creek area?
So we've gone over this through the 9 Mile Committee, and we've outlined some of the things that we'd like to see as far as like we've done hazing. We've always done hazing. We're also working to improve some of the rangeland, winter range in 2 of the main areas where they do winter. We've reduced the pressure on the on our hunts on the tribal lands in hopes that they'll stay, stay where they're supposed to be. We're also working on fencing, but our hope is that we can get them on our side. But I know the stance on this has been that we don't want them hunted, and that's kind of where we're where our stand is. But we're hoping to try to do some of those measures, but we haven't been successful with the hazing as far as them pushing them. We push them back over, but they do end up back over there until the last time we push them is usually in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, I would open the item up, management bison hunt in 9 Mile Range Creek unit for a motion.
This is Brad Horricks. I'd like to make a motion that we support the division's recommendations on this over-the-counter hunt for bison.
Okay, we have a motion to approve as presented by the DWR.
This is Dan Abeta, and I second Brad's motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to approve the management bison hunt, Range Creek, and 9 Mile unit as presented. Roll call, Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
No.
Dick?
Yes.
Daniel? Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Jeff? Taniguchi?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. We will move on to item 10, managing predatory wildlife species policy revisions. Darren, do you want to just take a brief moment and just summarize that for us?
Sure. We're recommending this for a couple of reasons, and normally we don't take policies around, but whenever we have things that pertain to predators, we feel like it's a good idea to get public input. The first thing is when we were going through the mule deer plan and looking at all this new really good data that Covey presented earlier, we felt like it'd be timely to revisit this policy and use some of that data when we're looking at whether predator management is necessary or not. The second part of this is the legislature passed some new statute this session that requires that the division director do certain things. One is determine whether or not predators are limiting a prey population. Secondarily, allowing the game hunters to take predators in the fall. And there's a reporting requirement. But primarily we had to be responsive to that legislation. And Covey and I sat down and with several others and tried to come up with some guidelines for our district biologists on how to determine if predators are limiting, and then what to include in a plan if it was necessary to reduce predator density. So that's what you see there. The main body of the document actually didn't change a whole lot. What really changed were the parameters for mule deer and bighorn sheep when a unit would qualify for these kind of things. And then we have prescriptions by predator species for how you would reduce those densities if you implement a plan.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Darren. Miles, do you want to address the public comments on this item?
Sure. You know, it was an even split between all the categories at 33.3% opposed, support, and neutral on the proposal. So not a lot of strong feelings.
And Darren, on the next item, the Cougar and Bear rule amendments, is that incorporated in this, or is it separate?
It's separate. It's more of a housekeeping thing, and we can go through that, but when we get to that point. But so this is there are several things that we have to do in order to meet the statute that was passed. One is that we need to determine when we're seeing top-down pressure on a prey population. Secondarily, if we see that pressure, we need to do something about decreasing predator densities. And you know, those are the two key things we're trying to address in the policy.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the RAC?
Daniel Davis. Some population density data. Bighorns being what 90% of population objective. But just like we talked earlier about the Newfoundland unit, in on those units, are we at that 90% objective? Factor from getting to that 90% objective.
Those are the questions that we'd want our district biologists to answer, Daniel. So we actually on purpose left a lot of flexibility here, rather than have a one-size-fits-all trigger. We wanted to give our district biologists guidance, and so if you're the biologist in charge of that sheep herd, you want to do a couple things. You'd want to determine if you know, for example, our lion's a problem. We know from the literature that if you get, you know, even an individual lion that keys in on a sheep herd, they can be fairly devastating, especially if that herd is a new transplant, for example, or the numbers are low. And so with sheep, you usually would be a little more aggressive than maybe with some other species, especially if you have cause-specific mortality. And for most of our transplants, we've got good collar data. We go in when we see a sheep die and figure out what's going on. And so, but yeah, I guess, you know, in general, we wanted to give some sideboards, but then it'd be up to the district biologist to write a plan and say, these are my concerns here. Here's what I'm going to do to address it. Does that answer your question?
It does. Excuse me. Yeah, duly noted to the newly transplanted stuff. That's more concerned about perform population reduction tactics, and then implementing all these other predatory. That I appreciate that, Darren.
And Daniel, I think that's a valid concern. It would be weird for us to reach a population objective and start to employ U-hunts, predator reduction at the same time. I don't see a scenario where we do that. I never want to say never, but I don't see a scenario where we would do that. You know, there are some areas where, you know, we do have the desert units where there aren't hardly any deer, and those are a little different.
Yeah, when they're the singular source of prey, absolutely, I agree. the next question I had is being familiar with having kind of what some of that states authorizes specific tactics and chooses to utilize some of those tactics. Is that going to go through the public process as part of a plan? This out for the sportsman specifically?
So what we say in the policy, Daniel, is we actually rank our preferred methods of reduction, and sportsmen are always going to be our number one go-to. So if we need to reduce densities, we'll try to do it using sportsmen. Secondarily, down the line, we'd be looking at maybe using wildlife services, and probably the last choice would be to have the division go in and do some removals. And the only time I could foresee that is if we just can't meet the quotas that we need to do the reduction, or in an area that's just is so rugged that people don't want to hunt it. But we can do a lot in terms of setting up hunts to try to target specific areas with sportsmen. So that'll always be the first choice.
So, and you may not be the one to be able to answer this, but answer it. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments from the RAC? Okay, so the first item on this topic is the managing predatory wildlife species policy revisions. So that would be the item I would entertain a motion for.
Yeah, this is Dan Abeta, and I'll go ahead and make a motion that we accept and approve the division's proposal for predatory management.
Thank you.
This is Natasha. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. The motion and the second is to accept the managing predatory wildlife species policy revisions as presented by the DWR. Roll call. Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Yes.
Daniel? Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you. It's unanimous. So we'll move on to the Cougar and Bear rule amendments. Darren, if you just briefly summarize that for us.
Yeah, so there was a second piece of legislation that passed that set a lot of, it mirrored what our current rule requires, but it changed a couple of things. And one is it extended the window of time that the livestock producer can deal with a predator that's getting in and killing livestock, and it went from 72-hour window to a 96-hour window. And the second real change is it provided for the division to issue depredation tags for bears. We've already done this for lions, and we had a system for bears when they get into agricultural crops. So if they're eating melons or sunflowers or something like that, you could issue depredation tags. Now that would include a bear that's killing sheep, for example. So that's in statute now. That's the statute always trumps rule. So these changes to the rule are just to mirror what the statute did, and it's primarily a housekeeping exercise, honestly.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the RAC? I noticed, Darren, there was a provision in there that no monetary value could be obtained by the landowner on a deprivation situation.
Right. Yeah.
That was added, a new provision. Questions or comments from the RAC? Okay, Miles, are we under the, I guess, did we have separate public comments on this, or was it under the same umbrella?
There's a separate comment.
Okay.
And so in this case, there was 10% opposed, 40% were neutral, and 50% supported the proposal. And like I said, I don't recall any specific feedback on this one either.
Okay. There's no other discussion. I would entertain a motion on the Cougar and Bear rule amendments.
This is Natasha. I make a motion to accept the amendments to the Bear and Cougar rule amendment, or rule as presented.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Who was that? Was that Jeff?
Jeff Taniguchi. I second.
Hey, we have a motion and a second to accept the Cougar and Bear rule amendments as presented. Roll call. Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Dick?
Abstain.
Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Rebecca? Mike?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. I will. Do you want an opportunity to say anything, Daniel, or you just want to go ahead with that?
Was hoping to reach out for a point of clarification real fast to the vote, Mr. Chair. The question come up, and I apologize. With those, is that proprietary to private property, or does that encompass BLM and forest ground as well?
It includes all properties, but it would only apply in chronic situations. So if a person is losing livestock year after year and they've been working on the problem and they just haven't been able to solve it, this is how we handle it with lions. At least we issue those depredation tags, and they may be able to come in proactively and remove a couple of bears before they put sheep out. But that would be up to a district biologist and region to work with the producer, and typically we limit those in time and space. So in order to make sure we're actually getting in this case, the bear that's causing the damage, it's not a tool to reduce population size. It's to try and deal with a specific animal causing a specific amount of damage.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Miles, did you have anything you wanted to add? Not to this topic, just in general?
I just really appreciate the RAC's participation on this this new process and willingness. It's great that we have every RAC member attending the meeting tonight on this call. I think it went pretty well. And so again, I just want to thank everybody on the RAC for their time and dedication and working through this process with us.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank all the work, especially the people behind the scenes at the DWR that put on this for us. It's worked really well. And thanks for all the biologists and everyone to be in attendance and answer all the questions. Any other comments from the RAC?
Yeah, this is Brad Horricks. I was wondering what the population objective for the Hamburg home is going to be?
It's yeah, it's capped out now. It's maxed out. It's at carrying capacity.
Congratulations, Miles.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a good way to end this meeting. Everybody's smiling. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd make that motion.
Anybody dare second that?
This Richie, I'll second it.
All right, I think we got to go through a roll call. Sorry. Dan?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Becca?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you anyone that's viewing this from the general public. We appreciate all your comments, and we welcome them anytime. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.